Awesome. Great to see you this morning. Wow, so we've been sitting for a little while already, and we don't want to sit too long, especially in hard seats. The blood starts to pool in our feet and in our seat. So why don't we just stand up for a second before we get started? Maybe do some calf raises, get the blood pumping back to the brain. Yeah, shake it out a little bit. Great. Just stay standing for a moment. It's an incredible honor to be in this space today for a number of different reasons. One is that it's a Saturday, so it's just a pleasure to be with a group of educators dedicated to their students enough to be here on a Saturday. So I'm so excited to be with a group that has this level of commitment. Turn to someone that you're standing next to and just thank them for being here with you today. You know, something else great about being here on a Saturday, it's like we could be a little bit more of our full selves on a Saturday, right? It's like we can take off the professional masks a little bit. I can tell some of you arrived with your complete self today, so we're going to keep that going. So just turn to that person and tell them, you look incredible. Maybe one more thing before you sit down. I am thrilled to be here in Washoe County, Nevada, because to be in a school district that has elevated equity like you all have to the point where you have an office that's working systemically and not tucked away in the corner of the district, maybe buried under the organizational chart. You have a commitment to the work that we're engaging in today where it can actually work systemically. And there's collaboration between the Diversity and Equity Department and professional learning and development. We're all here today focusing on this. I mean, it is amazing. You all are poised to be leaders of this work just nationally. So before you sit down, one more thing. Give that person a high five and say, "We rock." So this is also a thrill for me. It's also a thrill for me to be able to look out there and to see these books at all your tables. You know, it's just amazing because, what started as ideas that were just floating around up here ended up manifesting in words, which ended up on pages, and then someone wanted to publish it. And then here we are. So to look at, I'm just humbled to see that. And a little bit of background on that book. So I started my career as an elementary teacher 22 years ago, and started working kind of quickly in the Office of Social Studies. A lot of elementary folks aren't, specialists, they're generalists, and those of us that work in elementary schools, know that there's certain subjects that folks like to teach maybe more than others. What I discovered really quickly on the elementary level with colleagues I worked with is there was a lot of trepidation around teaching social studies because sometimes it's considered a bunch of dates that you memorize, a series of wars, et cetera. And what I learned is that fourth grade teachers were really uncomfortable in the district I was in introducing students to the concept of slavery. Because in fourth grade, just nationally, that's where U.S. history starts. So I started working there for a couple of years, and then just found my place in equity work and professional learning. And so that was about 15 years ago. So the book is an attempt to document some lessons learned along the way because, we're all trying to figure this out. You know, if we had the issues around disproportionality and inequity solved, then we wouldn't have the evidence that we have that we have some issues. You know, we wouldn't have predictable disproportionality according to student group anymore, that type of thing. So with the book, it was almost like I wanted to offer my colleagues, you know, across the nation, just some lessons learned, sometimes the hard way, about trying to guide groups, teams, schools, trying to guide them to a better place, you know, to a place that we can call excellence with equity. And what I mean by that is a definition of excellence in education where equity is square in the middle of that definition. And it's a journey. It's absolutely a journey. So what you have in front of you are some tips, some real practical ideas, some kind of big out there ideas about how we can work together to help each other on this journey to excellence with equity at the center. So if we think about it as a journey, and we have to think, okay, so where are we heading to? What does that look like? A couple years ago, I came across a video. You may have seen this. I'm predicting a number of you probably have seen it, but we've never seen it together in community here in this room. When I first saw this, it really resonated on a very deep level. There's some truth in this video. And to me, when I saw it, immediately, I had to pause because it represented, on some level, to me, where we're heading on this journey. So go ahead, take the next few minutes, and let's enjoy this together.
My heart doesn't see race.
Love has no age limit.
That's my best friend.
We are neighbors and best friends.
We all have different religions, but we have universal love as well.
I love my sister.
Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.
Oh. Yeah, it's beautiful, right? There's something beautiful in there. Take the next 60 seconds. You'll see a stopwatch here. At the end of 60 seconds, there'll be a big stop sign, which just means let's come back together as a big group. So take the next 60 seconds and talk with someone about what you think. How might this video represent where we're heading on our journey to excellence with equity? Thank you. Something I want to mention before we get too far into this, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner of this image here, @JKrownapple, that's just my Twitter handle. Those of you who have Twitter, please, I encourage you to tweet ideas that come to your mind, insights that you have during this talk, and we can make this a little bit more interactive. We can have a conversation. So if you do tweet out, make sure to tag like @JKrownapple so that I can retweet or pass it on, that type of thing. And we can have more of a dialogue. So just looking at the come on now. Okay. Looking at the emotional response that this video can have on people, just scanning the room, there's something like truth with a capital T buried in here that's like the subtext. And there's some hairs to split with it too. And I think it's best captured by the young lady who says, "My heart doesn't see race." And there's something beautiful about that resonates with me, that I believe to be true. And at the same time, our eyes do see race, is what I believe. Our perception is distorted of each other to the point where we attach meaning to that construct of race. So we're going to explore that a little bit because that's just one of the many labels that we might put on each other. So we're going to dig a little deeper into what that means. Because the work of educational equity, a big part of it is correcting the damaging effects of the labels that we put on each other and that we put on our students. But I want to be clear that the way that we identify, our identity, is not the problem. Our dimensions of identity, that's not the issue. Whether that be black, white, Christian, Hispanic, gay, straight, Jewish, Muslim, able-bodied, able-minded, disabled, etc. Those dimensions of difference aren't the problem. What is the problem are the meanings that we attach to those labels. Okay? Does that resonate? The meanings that we attach to those labels. What I'm talking about are the deeply ingrained structural, subconscious, implicit assumptions and biases that we have associated with labels that we put on each other. These are the labels that give people unearned advantages and unfair disadvantages. All of this is pretty clear in the educational research, so let's take a look at that. Now, who in the room is familiar with the body of work that's called Visible Learning by Professor John Hattie? Okay, only a couple. Okay, well, let me explain what this is. So Professor Hattie is out of Melbourne, Australia, and over the course of 15 years, he conducted the largest study on educational research ever in the history of the world, in the history of the universe. I mean, the magnitude of this thing is incredible. So what his work, what Professor Hattie's work incorporates are over 1,000 meta-analyses. So if you're not familiar with that term meta-analyses, what it is, it's a study of educational research. So it's research on research. Okay, got that? Research on research. So what his study is research on meta-analyses. So it's research on research on research. It's like 3 levels down. Like the movie Inception when Leonardo DiCaprio goes way down there, time slows down, you're watching it and your mind starts to bend in ways that you didn't know was possible. It's like really, the magnitude of this thing is awesome. So it incorporates over 50,000 studies of educational research, which included 3 years ago over 240 million students worldwide. Now, I say 3 years ago because the study is ongoing. He's always adding in current research and checking his effect sizes and so on. So his goal, almost 20 years ago now, was to figure out what worked in the classroom. What he found out real quickly was almost everything that we do works. So that's good news. Almost everything in educational research has a positive effect size. Now, there are a few negative ones that actually impact students in a negative way, which they, like when there's a negative in front of the effect size, it implies that students slide behind. They actually lose ground. Things like holding students back, student mobility can have that effect. There are some negative ones, but for the most part, almost everything we do has a positive effect. So he changed the focus of his study. It changed from what works in classrooms to what works best in classrooms. Okay, now here's where the important part comes in, and you can see it on this graphic. 0.40 is the magic number. So it's what he, through his study, established. 0.40 is what he called the hinge point. The hinge point. So that is where what the influence is, no matter if that influence, what we're talking about is homework, the effects of divorce, direct instruction, response to intervention. There's over 200 of these influences that he identified. Some of them happen in the classroom level, some at the school level, some at the home level, but there are over 200. So at 0.40 is when the influence equates to 1 year's worth of growth for 1 year in the classroom. So cooperative learning, for example, all of the research worldwide on cooperative learning boils down to an effect size of 0.41. Good, it does what it's supposed to do, right? Homework, we have to look real closely at the elementary level. It equates to an effect size of 0.15. So he has some red flags, not to isolate these influences because it might be easy to see, oh, homework doesn't have a big effect, let's stop doing it. Well, that's not the intention. The intention is to look at it more holistically and inform conversations professionally about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So for instance, even homework on the elementary level, it might be good just for the practice of developing habits. We might not invest in homework as a strategy that's going to impact student achievement that's measured by standardized test scores, right? Same thing with like music education. The effect size on music education isn't real high within this study because it looks at the impact on student achievement as measured by standardized test scores. Well, we're not going to get rid of music education. We're going to do it. Music education is worthy just for music education. We're not going to do music education just to impact math scores. Right? You following me? So anyway, I say all this because there's nuances in this, and he never intended this work to be a checklist of let's stop doing these things and let's do these things. However, they can inform some incredible conversations about our professional practice. Now, what I want to point out here one of the most powerful influences he identified was not labeling students. Effect size of 0.61. Okay, let's think about that for a moment. What that implies, if we wanted to get our act together and focus on one thing and do a really good job at it, retrain our minds around it, if we focused on not labeling students, this implies that that would equate to about 1.5 years worth of growth for 1 year in the classroom. Like that type of acceleration. I got real curious about this about 1 year ago because I realized that out of like those 200 influences, this was the only one that had the word not at the beginning of it. It's the only influence where Professor Hattie said, you know, not doing this is a good thing. So I started to think about that. Does that mean that actually doing it has the inverse of that? Actually labeling students has a -6.1 effect size? And he said, yeah. It was a conscious choice to put not in front of it. So if he would have framed it the other way, it would be by far the most damaging thing that we do to students, as far as on the classroom level. So we'll come back to this. Before we do that, I want to lift up teacher-student relationships and where that falls in terms of influencing student achievement. The worldwide research on that is, it's an effect size of 0.72. We're talking about almost 2 years worth of growth for 1 year in the classroom. Now, this doesn't tell us much because everyone has a relationship with their teacher, right, if you're a student. So later on, what we'll do is crack that open and look at, okay, what is it specifically in the research that said should happen within that relationship for it to basically double the rate of learning, to move the dial, move the needle like that. Okay, I want to tell you a story about this person, Lauren Beeman. So Lauren's an assistant principal. When I met her, she was a 5th grade teacher, and she was actually a team leader. I met her, I was teaching a course at Johns Hopkins that was part of her administration and supervision certification. So she had just had an action research course. So the course I was teaching was after that. And we were working one night on the Pygmalion effect. Does everyone remember the Pygmalion effect from like Psychology 101? Okay, it's the concept of the self-fulfilling prophecy. The seminal work was in the 60s when teachers were given groups of students that were selected randomly by their locker numbers. And so those locker numbers, the teachers were told that they were actually like a form of IQ scores that predicted advanced performance. So the longitudinal study then showed that the students started to perform in line with the expectations that were on them. So if they were grouped in this high group, they started to perform like, quote, high students. So we were working on the Pygmalion effect, and she said, hey, this reminds me of my action research project. And she explained it to the course, and I just thought, oh my gosh, there's so much nested within this story that we can unravel that really illustrates a lot about not only not labeling students, but educational equity in general. So here's what happened. Lauren was a team leader in a team where it was very normal to do what's called ability grouping, which, by the way, the effect size on that is a 0.18. Okay, very normal. So for math class, what they would do is leave their homeroom, and they would go to another teacher where the teacher would teach the group that was labeled like on grade level math. Then there was another teacher that would teach the group labeled above grade level. Is this familiar at all? Okay, it's pretty normal. Ability grouping is something that's very common and something that we really need to look at because there's a lot of de facto tracking that goes on. So we need to look carefully at that, and if we're really doing flexible grouping, or if we're doing something more aligned with tracking that we call ability grouping. So anyway, they had ability grouping. One of the teachers on our team started to complain about workload. So they had what was called quarterly math assessments that they had to score. These things were pretty substantial. To score one, it would take 10, 15 minutes. So the teacher who had the class labeled on grade level had like 30 students. The teacher who had the group labeled above grade level had like 10. Okay? So Lauren was the teacher who had the group labeled above. So she thought she had a solution. She said, here's what I'll do. I'll take proportionally the students out of your class into mine where we have the same number, and I'll just teach what's called the two-group math model. She'll teach 2 groups. No problem. She had the solution. That was until she overheard the students talking. Okay, the students that were being moved into her classroom, they were lining up for lunch. You could probably predict what they were saying. Okay? All they were told is they were moving into her class. They were thrilled. They were like, I'm being promoted. That's not what they said. They said, I got moved up. Right? I got moved up. I'm in above now. So she overhears this and she thought, oh crap, what do I do? You know? So she's in this dilemma here where, you know, Lauren's not the type of person that's going to go up to a student and say, oh no, honey, you're not all that. You know, no. Stay in your lane, that type of thing. She's not that type of person. So she was in her action research course that night, literally, and she slept on it, woke up the next day and realized this is going to be my action research project. So she got the parents involved, the administrators involved, the school counselors involved, and the plan was this, to let the students keep their beliefs about themselves, that they were advanced students. Now, she had to do some things instructionally, like she really had to do flexible grouping. Like within that group, she was mixing them up all the time, so they had no idea, you know, why. Or that they had ideas about why, but she was breaking down the barriers of like which group was on top. So they mixed it up by interest or mixed it up by topic or mixed it, all kinds of things she came up with. And she also did behind the scenes work to fill in some of the instructional gaps that were there because she had this group of students coming in that like there was some content they weren't exposed to. So she had to do different things for them. Well, at the end of the first marking period that they were in there, all of the students passed the above grade level assessment. Furthermore, at the end of the year, she said it was indistinguishable which ones were which. Like if she would block out the names, she couldn't tell if it was the original group of kids or the ones that got moved in. Then Lauren, you know, I've kept up with her, and she kept track of those students throughout middle school because, you know, she had this action research project. She was very much invested in them. Every single one of them stayed in the above grade level trajectory through middle school going into high school. So this story, it illustrates a lot, but what I want to pull out is the most important thing she did was allow the students to believe and keep their beliefs that they were remarkable. I mean, all she had to do was not damage their beliefs that they were very capable. Right? Sounds kind of easy. Let's go back to Professor Hattie's barometer here. So what this also illustrates is that old saying that when you remove labels, you remove limits, right? So we know that there's a lot of research on not labeling students, okay, some of this illustrates that, but this also illustrates the incredible power of expectations. So take a look here at the barometer. What Lauren helped happen with her students is what John Hattie calls student expectations. Just take a moment and predict where this would show up on this barometer of influence. Okay, you ready for this? Literally off the chart type of performance. It's true. I mean, we have incredible power as educators. We really can accelerate student learning and achievement. We have that power depending on how we choose to use it, what we choose to do, and why we choose to do it. I mean, we're talking about like 400% acceleration here, if 0.40 is the hinge point, assuming that that's true. So in terms of high expectations, student expectations, here's how Professor Hattie describes what happened here. By working through the labels that limit our perception, by finding out what students expect of themselves, and by supporting them in meeting, then exceeding those expectations, it becomes a reinforcing loop as students build confidence and push their expectations higher. Make sense? I mean, remarkable. We'll come back to this, but student voice is at the center of this, okay? Because we have to know what students believe of themselves. we have to engage them in goal setting around that. We have to engage them in pushing their goals higher once they achieve them and so on. So I told you a story of a teacher. I'm going to share a story about a student with you now to illustrate some of these ideas. What I'm going to do is show you some bulleted descriptors of this student's story one at a time. As I show them to you, what I invite you to do is imagine what this student looks like. Okay, some of the descriptors I'm going to give you would be labels that would be put on this student's story, on their lived experience. Some of them may be familiar. Some of you might have students that come to mind that fit these descriptors, spot on. I'm not going to ask you to share with anyone, so all I'm inviting you to do is be honest with yourself and imagine a student that would fit these descriptors. Ready? Now, with the sunlight in here, can everyone see this, or should I read them out loud? Like over here, can you all see it? Okay, cool. And you have a monitor back there, too, and back there. Okay, one at a time. And one that I meant to add it back in last night is father strung out on heroin. Some of you have students that come to mind that fit some, most, all of these. See a few heads. Well, this is my story. This student is me, and I'm going to share a little bit about my background with you. So, I was born in Stockholm, Sweden, and into some circumstances that may be a little bit unusual or different than your lived experience, I'm guessing. So I was born into a destructive religious cult in Stockholm, Sweden. It, at the time, went by the Children of God. It still exists. It goes by the Family. People are familiar with it sometimes because HBO did a documentary a few years back on it and focused on the child abduction that went on with this group. But also, some people know about it because the Phoenix family, River Phoenix, Rain Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix, their parents were leaders in this group as well. And also, there's a number of other celebrities that have connections, especially with their parents being involved in this through the 70s up to the 90s. Rose McGowan is one. Every now and then I learn about someone else who has some kind of connection here. So my parents were both searching for something they felt was missing, which really left them vulnerable to recruitment. Similar to how gangs operate. You find a place of belonging when you're searching for it, and that's how they recruit. So my dad was disillusioned. He had just come back to the United States from the Vietnam War. He had quit heroin cold turkey so he could actually be deployed. Because the way he explained it to me was that it was just eventually easier to have access to heroin, so it just progressed to that. But they wouldn't send people back that were strung out. So the choice was to go through some kind of thing there, detox, that type of thing, or to just quit and deal with it. And so that's what happened. So when he got back to the United States, he said he had a really hard time connecting with anyone. He hitchhiked across the nation. He said he felt like he was window shopping on the world. So that was until he came across, one day outside a mall, a group of people that were playing guitars, talking about peace, love, God, spiritual revolution against the system. And he thought he found a place where he could be connected with a higher purpose. He found a place of belonging. He felt like that sense of inclusion. So across the Atlantic, my 15-year-old Irish mother was skipping school, high school, ran into a same situation in the front lawn of a house in Dublin, Ireland. A group talking about peace, love, God, spiritual revolution against the system. And she quickly got sucked up into the world of the children of God. So they both eventually ended up in a commune in Ireland, where the leader there said that he had a vision that they were supposed to get married, and so the next day they got married, which is, it also, by the way, illustrates why a cult is a cult, because you do what the leader says. So they got married. I was born not too long after that in Stockholm, Sweden. The reason why they were in Stockholm, Sweden is because a lot of times members of this group and groups like it would move around to take part in different projects, missions, whatever. And a lot of it had to do with recruiting. So the philosophy of this group was getting increasingly controversial, increasingly illegal, as they were encouraging strange and just downright illegal sexual practices. And the Italian courts actually put a name to it. They called it evangelical prostitution. So it's where women would go out at night to nightclubs, and it was a form of recruiting, bringing lost men back, like shepherding, that type of thing. So they called it flirty fishing. And also at the same time, they promoted more and more openly child sex. Child sex, child adult sex. The idea was it didn't matter how old you were, it was the ultimate way of communing with God. So this was around the time that my mom thought, this probably isn't the best environment for me to raise two children. My brother was born about a year after me, and so she started planning her way out. And she did something absolutely remarkable. As far as what I know about the brainwashing that goes on in these situations, she deprogrammed herself. It was too dangerous to tell anyone about this, because what would happen is when people wanted out of this group, they would kidnap the children and hide them somewhere on the other side of the world, and they would raise them, with that indoctrination to keep everything going. So she couldn't tell anyone. My dad brought us back to Akron, Ohio when I was 3. So I've been in our country since I was 3. And it took my mom about almost between 9 months and a year to catch up with us. The reason being is not only was she an immigrant, but she had documentation issues, because part of being involved in this group is that you gave up your whole identity, okay? You washed away your past. You took on a new identity, which included a new name. So my parents weren't going by their names anymore. They were going by these Old Testament names. Matter of fact, I always thought I was named John Krownapple after my dad, because his name's John Krownapple. It wasn't until about 10 years ago when I was preparing for a workshop, early in the morning, I called up my mom and I said, hey, tell me more about my name. Were you considering anything else? And she said, well, you weren't named after your dad, you were named after John the Baptist. And I was like, whoa, okay, that was an early morning kind of, like, wow. Talk about labels, right? All of us walk around with these names that are labels that are put on us, but they're not who we really are. Right? But they are a big part of the story we tell ourselves about who we are, which is another way to explain identity. Our identity is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves on a personal level as well as an organizational level. So anyway, my dad wanted to name me Hezekiah, which would have ended up being a much different lived experience for me, right? I might even have a much different identity. I'd have a cool nickname, though. What's up, Hez? I mean, I could just imagine. It'd be fun. But I almost ended up Hezekiah or Jehu, and my mom persuaded him something more mainstream after John the Baptist. So my mom had trouble getting into the country. She eventually did. She showed up in Akron, Ohio. That's when she disclosed to my dad that she wanted nothing else to do with the group. She wanted out. So a few days later, my brother and I disappeared. We were supposed to be going to the library, and we just never came back. I was between 3 and 4 at the time, and I remember this day. I might have been 4 already, but I actually remember this day. I remember taking the bus. I remember getting to the compound. I remember being happy to see all the kids I hadn't seen in a while. But later, my mom became a writer, and when she wrote her first book, it was about our story, and she called that chapter's title Kidnapped. So child abduction was one of the things that became a real problem for the cult during the mid-'70s to early '90s. Like I mentioned, people who wanted to leave, they would take their kids. There's been movies done about this. There's been TV, made-for-TV movies done about this. It's not only my mom. They're much actually more heartbreaking because our story actually works out at the end. It's not always like that. So luckily for my brother and I and my mom, actually all of us, my dad, there are groups and were groups dedicated to helping people get out of these type of situations. So one of them linked up with my mom, or my mom linked up with them. They helped her find us. We were about 4 hours south of where she was. They helped her get legal representation and helped her through the whole process with the courts, and there was a lot going on with the courts. It was a custody battle, all kinds of other legal stuff. She sued the cult for $1 million and won, but never collected a cent. And one of the things that happened, though, that was significant to my life was that one of the judges took away our passports, took away my mom's passport, my passport, and my brother's passport to protect my dad's rights to see us. So think about this. Here's my mom, who wanted to get us, go back to Ireland, where she had a family, she had support, and now she couldn't do that. She wasn't even 20 years old. She was an immigrant, not 20 years old, no high school diploma, no family structure, and here she was, stuck. So she got help. This group really helped her get housing. We moved into Channelwood Apartments in Akron, Ohio, which was a Section 8 housing complex, which was built and still maintained to this day by Alpha Phi Alpha, which is a historically black fraternity. And whenever I meet someone from that fraternity, it's like I have a special place in my heart for any Alpha because of what they were able to do for us in providing us our first home. I walked down the street to St. Vincent St. Mary's, and I included a picture there in the lower right-hand corner from first grade, which I love the suit, so I had to just include it because it's so fly. And, you know, St. Vincent's is actually famous in Akron, Ohio. LeBron James made it famous because that's where he played in high school, and when they started televising games on ESPN, I was like, that's my school! And so he and I are tight. He's a whole generation younger than me, but his mom did grow. He grew up in his mom's place, which was 2 blocks away from where my dad lived in Akron. But I love claiming LeBron. He's the best. Anyway, we're kind of close to Golden State here, aren't we? Is that a thing here? Golden State Warriors? Oh, I still love you. It's all right. So let me just actually get to the point here before I just totally lose my track of thinking. Take a look on this slide. Before I unpack this a little bit, sometimes I forget to mention that there's a happy ending to all this. I have a very functional family. My dad eventually got out. He got out shortly afterwards because he wanted a relationship with us. Now he looks back on it and is like, oh my God, that was a crazy time in our lives. But like, very functional. My dad and my stepdad actually go out to eat every Thursday. They're the best of friends. Neither has been married to my mom for 20 years. But those two made it work, right? Those two made it work. So there's always silver lining. Yeah, and my mom, she lives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half away, but we get together for every holiday, all of us, we get together for every holiday, and I have a very functional family. It's atypical, it is not dysfunctional, but it took me years of processing out of that because of what society says you should be and what a family should look like. And those are some of the systems that we just have to kind of work against, especially because our students are coming from families that look non-normative, right? Anyway, get back to this. So what's going on in this slide? So I told part of this story to a colleague of mine 21 years ago, elementary school teacher, one of my colleagues I was working with. We became friends, and I started telling her part of the story. And she said something that day that I'll never forget. It's clear as anything. She said, John, I would never have expected any of that from you. And so I learned a really important lesson, or I started learning an important lesson that I'm still learning, still exploring to this day. And lately I've been focusing in on that word expected, because I really believe student expectations and expectations that we have of each other end up manifesting our reality. So when she said, John, I would have never have expected any of that from you, the next thing she said was, I would have thought you were the all-American boy growing up in the suburbs with the white picket fence and all. And so what I started to learn that day was something I believe to this day, which is that's probably part of the narrative that most, if not, well, the vast majority of people have playing in their subconscious when they see me and don't really know me. So when I enter a room, for instance, I think the first thing people see is race and gender. And I think that narrative that she described as a normal upbringing, white picket fence, growing up in the suburbs and all, I think that's what goes through people's minds. And I very much believe that it's connected to our narrative around being white. And then secondary, there's some male stuff going on, maybe not exactly with that except for the all-American boy part, the boy part. But the third thing is class, I think. But the class is definitely third for me because I can switch that up depending on how I dress and everything. Like right now, I'm dressing professionally, talking more professionally than I might with my friends, right? But I think, what else are people paying attention to when they don't know me, right? When I walk into a room. And I think it's usually on a subconscious level, sometimes at a conscious level. So here's a few things that I've learned about what's illustrated on this slide. And I'm going to slow down here because anytime I have the opportunity where people actually want to listen to the things I have to say, like there's just a point that I want to make that is the most important point out of all of this. So I'm going to slow down here and emphasize some things because what's going on this slide is just so insidious and poisonous in terms of our humanity, engaging with each other, and being able to actually perceive and see our full humanity and not box people in based on our social constructs. So the first thing that I've learned is that I've been conditioned throughout my life not to see the narrative on the left-hand side when I see people who look like me. That my mind doesn't go there when I see another person categorized as white. It just doesn't go there. I've been conditioned much more to see the narrative on the right, just like my friend Pam pointed out to me 21 years ago. Matter of fact, when I look at that, every single time, it never gets old, actually. I look at that and I'm like, yeah, that seems like me. There's something about that. I have to actually remind myself that that's not my story, that my story is actually what's illustrated on the left. Which brings me to the second thing that I've learned. Okay, the second thing I've learned, this is critical. If I missed this, I'd blow this whole thing. I'd be disserving you. I've learned that I can walk away from that narrative at any point because of my perceived dimensions of difference, specifically being white. I believe I can keep that story to myself, and people will never assume anything bad that might be connected to the stuff on the left unless I tell them my story. And what's trippy about it is even when I tell them my story, I hear things like, wow, you were so resilient. You really overcame some things. It's like good things are attached to it, which is really interesting to me. It's the same as, about 15 years ago when I committed myself to diversity work and then immediately stopped getting invited to happy hour, which started to teach me a lesson about leadership of equity, is that you have to be ready for that kind of stuff. You have to be ready for people to show their true colors. You have to be ready to deal with some people not wanting to engage with you at the same level. I don't think I've ever shared that out loud. I'm getting a little emotional. I thought, anyway, let's come back. Basically, presenting as I do, I believe that I can walk away from equity work at any time, and actually, depending on how you look at it, my life might actually become a little bit more comfortable. I might not have to deal with some of the stuff that I deal with, some of the resistance from folks. Now, the way I look at it, no, because this is a part of what I believe is my mission and purpose in life, so I wouldn't be able to reach self-actualization, so I don't look at it that way, but I know it's true. I can check out of this game at any point in time. Not even a game, but this line of work, where I know there's folks here in the room where you can't walk away from diversity and equity work because you live it every day. You can't walk away from negative things that might be put in the left-hand column in tables like this. You can't walk away from maybe being black, Hispanic, First Nations, Indigenous. You can't walk away the same way that I can. And here's why. Because here's what I believe is why. What I believe with all my heart. I think I can just melt into what I just referred to as whiteness, which, by the way, is the real meaning of that metaphor that's often used. It's called the melting pot, which was originally a poem that was written about basically what was called the European problem. How do you create a nation out of all these European immigrants coming speaking different languages, spelling their names differently, etc.? The idea became captured in this metaphoric melting pot that originated as a poem that here's how you deal with it. You melt away your ethnicity. You change your name from O'Connor to Connor. You hide your accent. You melt into being American, which at the time was synonymous with being white, because some things were deemed unmeltable. You couldn't melt away the external markers of difference. Does that make sense? So I think that for me, basically, and I know I was slowing down there with this, I know that this isn't necessarily a diversity conversation where we're hanging out around a campfire, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, celebrating how great diversity is. Although there is something beautiful, and I promise we'll return to that was captured in that video. There really is. But the process of consciousness development around differences, especially around ones that have become taboo, like race, it requires us to go through a period together, a stage of our evolution, a stage of our process, which I try to unpack in that book. I just call it sitting in the darkness. Like, we need to sit with our reality, what's outside of our own lived experience, and we have to witness the pain of each other's lived experience. And that's not exactly bright and sunshiny. And that's where that metaphor, sitting in the darkness, especially the darkness of what we don't know, it involves us during that time to really work to understand our cultures. Who do our cultures serve well, and who do they serve to varying degrees less well, right? All the way down to our classroom cultures. Just how we have things set up. The way we do things around here. Who served well, who served not as well. So for me, and I'm speaking about culture in general, like societal, here's what I believe. I believe that the dominant culture has served me so well that I can come from the background that I do, and I'll still probably, until we fix this thing, I'll still be able to accrue the benefits that society has in store for people who look like me, even if it's seemingly as small as the benefit of the doubt, which isn't a small thing at all. I don't think that the dominant culture necessarily cares about the details of my story, my lived experience, my dimensions of difference, etc. It just wants me to be as white as possible, to melt into the norm. Here's some other things I believe. I believe that there's this invisible force that we sometimes can call historical inertia that makes that whole dynamic happen with relative ease. I just want to be normal. Now, on the other hand, sometimes I imagine what it would be like if I didn't have my external markers of difference. What if what if I walked through my life with the markers that my daughters have? I have 2 daughters. How would my lived experience be different? What if I didn't have markers of whiteness? What if I had, markers of blackness? What if I didn't have markers of able-bodiedness or able-mindedness? What would that be? What would that be like? And I want to illustrate race because it's just so visceral, and it's all around us, and especially in the past 6 months, it's just, there's been this resurgence of white nationalism. It's just, you can see it everywhere. It's like above ground now. So one of the things that has made it very visible is the news, with the police shootings, and the most recent one in Dallas, Texas, just broke my heart. I started sobbing. So here's what I believe. I believe that I had the markers of blackness instead of the markers of whiteness, which is more than skin color. Could be skin color, hair texture. Could be a number of different things. But if I had markers of blackness, here's what I believe. I think that the dominant culture would use those markers to make me question my adequacy and even my sanity. I think that I would encounter daily indignities that might even become normal to the point where I don't recognize them anymore. I think that I'd be more likely to be sent to the office, suspended from schools. I'd be more likely to, statistically, now this is all evidence. The evidence is there. I'd be statistically more likely to go to prison. And I'd be statistically more likely to go to prison through a school-to-prison pipeline that research shows starts in pre-K. I think I'd be statistically more likely to be treated different and more negatively for the exact same behaviors, which is clear in the research. And I don't think it would matter if I was able to speak 5 languages. Oh, I don't think it would matter much. I don't think it would matter much if I was able to speak 5 languages, if my parents weren't divorced and living together, if we had 5 European cars, and if they each made $1 million a year. Because I think when I would be pulled over, I would be more likely for it to end in really, really bad ways. Because none of that would be seen. All that would be seen are the markers of difference that carry some really, really negative historical baggage, right? Some really, really bad stuff. So we have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. Our work really is to surface this stuff, make it visible, sit in the darkness enough where we can actually see it so we can actually deal with it. We can challenge and change those harmful assumptions that we have connected to labels that we put on each other and our students, even if those labels are something as simple as, oh, you're only on grade level. Imagine if we taught students to think differently about themselves and not where they fell in a hierarchy, which was the original construction of race, too, was to know exactly where someone fell on a hierarchy based on how they presented externally. So, just to be blunt here, I think this work is so very important. I think it is the work. I think it's so critical that we keep in mind that if we choose to do nothing, if we choose to act like these things are not problems, that racism is not a problem that permeates our schools, if we choose to ignore it, we are perpetuating these systems. We're keeping them alive and well. To eradicate injustice, I believe each of us must consciously examine the nature of the privilege that each of us has, just by the fact that we have jobs even. How do these systems serve us well? And how will we benefit maybe from other people's oppression? It's like, if we're not doing something every day consciously to work against these forces would just plow us over. So, the whole idea of sitting in the darkness, as I said, it's not a kumbaya type of moment. However, it's a phase and a magnificent process. I believe that this is a process that happens all around it. We're a part of this process. So I want to invite us to experience this as best we can during these last moments that we have together. So if you would, please humor me and just close your eyes for a few seconds. And while you have your eyes closed, we're going to do a little imagery. And I invite you to imagine what I'm describing to you. Imagine you are an acorn buried below the ground. It's dark. You can't move. You smell the dampness of the earth that surrounds you. Every sound is muffled. The muffled vibrations from footsteps above you could easily be distant thunder or an earthquake. You start to make up a story of what's happening to you. You're desperate for an explanation because it gives you control. Your mind plays tricks on you. You may be stuck here forever, trapped, maybe even dead. You feel fear in the darkness, danger. It's scary, lonely. You're uncomfortable, and you're vulnerable. But you have no idea that you're a seed containing everything you need to become a massive oak tree. Time passes. You slowly start to expand. It feels like you're growing like a slowly inflating balloon. You feel a crack in your outer shell. It spreads until there are many. Your shell begins to open up. Something emerges from your core, something that you didn't even know was there. It startles you, but it is you. Now you're moving. You feel it. You don't know where you're moving to or where you're moving from, but you are indeed moving. You're slowly pushing soil out of the way until you push against one speck of soil and it becomes a small, blinding light. That spot of light is warm. It helps you push faster and push stronger. The blinding spot gets bigger as you push the bits of soil away. As the spot gets bigger, you become warmer. And the blinding spot is no longer a spot. It's all around you. It's no longer blinding. You can see. At first, blurry, then clarity, you can see. You look down and see soil. You look up and see bright light. You're still moving toward it, but growing and expanding all the way. You notice you're not alone. There are many around you, together, others in your forest. In fact, you're growing as a forest. You feel alive, and somehow you know that you always were, even during your time in the darkness. Please now slowly open your eyes. So this process that I just invited you to imagine represents the inside-out journey that leads us to our better selves, and it also leads us to excellence with equity in education. It leads to authentic equity. The journey has 3 phases, and the first is sitting in the dark. Now, if we could interview that mature oak tree, if we could just talk to it and say, hey, what was it like for you down there? I am positive that the oak tree would not describe its time in the darkness as a place of comfort, right? It wouldn't say, yeah, that was great. Probably say it was cold, scary, dark, lonely, uncomfortable. I wish I didn't have to be there. But at the same time, I think that oak tree would recognize that that part in its process, that part in its journey, was an absolute necessary phase that it had to go through in order to become who it was meant to be. So like that, I believe that there's time that we need to spend together, germinating, really understanding what's going on around us at a deep level. Why do we have these disparities? You know, why does this equity work so hard? Why is it that someone giving us a list of things to do in the classroom just won't cut it? We really need to understand. So here's how I describe this journey in the book. It's a 3-phase process. It leads through sitting in the darkness, which could be exploration, to commitment. Commitment's like that point in the movie The Matrix, where Lawrence Fishburne presents Keanu Reeves those 2 pills, and he has a choice. He's engaging his free will. And then after you choose, you can never go back, right? You can't go back to seeing things the way they are. I can never go back to saying, Nevada? See, it was hard for me to even think. Okay. I can never go back to it. You know what's funny about that? And this actually represents a lot. So I was told and warned not to say Nevada. That people take it very personally. I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'll do that. I actually had to make a mistake yesterday and say it. But now that I've experienced it, I won't go back. Does that make sense? So it sounds funny. Yeah. You know, I won't go back. But it's the same thing with this journey. You cannot present to someone their journey that they have to go through. They actually have to go through it. So in terms of the work of equity, we actually have to engage in the work in order to change our minds so we can change the lives of our students. And there's no shortcut. There's no way around it. The way is through it. So I went on some kind of rabbit trails here, but the good thing is that I'm going to be closing our session, and I'm going to close it this afternoon on the ground with what we can do. Because what you see here is a way that we can illustrate our journey to excellence with equity and what each one of these components mean. It's not really about diversity, it's about inclusion. Each one of these environments is diverse, whether it's an exclusionary environment, segregated environment, integrated environment, or inclusive environment. Each one, diversity is there, so it's not diversity that's the issue, it's our response to diversity. It's the environment that we create. So we'll get a little bit more into that, and how if we're not including cultural competence in our definition of excellence, it's as simple as kids are going to get hurt. So what we'll come back to this afternoon is this, because sometimes folks ask with this diagram, so how does culturally responsive teaching fit into all this? If we think about it this way, cultural proficiency is a journey. Whether we call it cultural proficiency or not, there's a journey that we have to go through, no matter what we label it. So how does that journey show up in our professional practice? That's where culturally responsive teaching comes in. Now, culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally responsive leadership, at its core, at its heart, is relationships. It values relationships, and especially relationships across difference. So what we'll get into this afternoon before we leave, and we'll have some fun with it, we'll practice moving and having fun, is we'll get into this, that 0.72. Okay. Those impactful variables of teacher-student relationships, what are they? So I'll leave that as a cliffhanger now, because we'll end this afternoon on the ground with some very specific things that we can do immediately, not to circumvent our journey, because we still need to go through our journey, but going through a journey doesn't mean we put things on pause. We don't put action on pause. We do both simultaneously. So I'm looking forward to a great day today. I'm going to be doing a breakout session on teacher-student relationships, and we're going to be ending right here, back here, all together, and it's going to be pretty festive. It won't be quite kumbaya, but it'll be something along those lines, and I guarantee you will not want to miss it. So thank you for having me this morning, and I look forward to learning with you today.